Excellent. So here we are back from lunch or whatever it is you do in your midday or whenever you're witnessing this workshop. And this morning we did a lot of review of resourcing practices, which in this Compassion Alchemy map, I've really put in kind of the first module, the earth element. And so we've reviewed those techniques, methods, aspects, but in light of this module's focus, which is on maintaining open-heartedness in the face of all life, or developmentally, you could say developing tolerance to paradox and ambiguity. And we're working sort of with our inner teenager, right? The part of us that historically outgrew conformity and then had to learn to deal with vast complexity when there isn't just a right, wrong, tribe, and other, or the parts of us that maybe never did that transition. And if you meditate enough, it'll do that to you. So you got to be ready, right? And we also covered the idea this morning of waking up, growing up, cleaning up, and showing up. So I think perhaps if you were to take anything with you from this training today, that might be the one, is just get all four of those somehow. And in that work that Ken Wilber developed and others have gone on with his inspiration and continue to develop, they, for a while at least, were not talking so much about meditation or spiritual practice. They talked about an integral life practice, right? I don't particularly like that language any more than other language, but to give you an example, what they put together was kind of a modernization of what yogis have been doing for a long time. So in an integral life practice for the day, they might include your exercise regime, which could be more of a Qigong yoga type thing, or could even be like your weightlifting or running. They would include a contemplative aspect, like an inner exploration, doing shadow work or doing an emotional intelligence training. They would include a bare awareness practice, kind of these kind of like insight or letting the thoughts become quiescent, abiding in intrinsic awareness. And you could think about, if you wanted some fun, as you approach your, whatever you call it, spiritual practice, personal growth practice, self-care, recovery from being a nurse or a therapist or a minister, whatever you call your thing, what would it be like if you included all four of those at some point in the day or week or month or year, right? So as I go throughout my day, let's say, for example, I'm doing a round of this Tibetan meditation practice called chud, which is this complex visualization. And they're like, oh yeah, you're feeding the demons and you're chanting to Buddhas and like you're realizing gods and demons are illusions and so are you. And then and it's super complex. You're like, you blow a trumpet and bang a drum at the same time, and you're singing and visualizing and popping out of your body and all kinds of cool stuff I'm not even allowed to tell you about. And then there's also a period in there where you totally abide in silence. And that is a great example of kind of a lot of the elements in an integral practice, because when you're doing the tantric drum and bell while chanting, you're forcing your somatic body to integrate and participate, like you're actually doing some kind of bilateral brain stimulation while you're doing the visualizations. So it's like, you'd never catch it if you weren't nerding out on like trauma therapy and in-depth tantric meditations. But actually, they sort of figured out you're meditating on going beyond all fear and like giving up grasping and attachment. And once one of the ways you do it, you make music about it and stimulate your brain bilaterally by doing something with your body. That's great heckin' technology, man. And then they are exercising the visualization part of your meditative capacity through, because it's a whole long visualization. And then they're also exercising the formless part because you go into these periods of just absolute silence. They're meditating the somatico energetic because you're visualizing and feeling like stuff happen in your subtle body. And you're also working on the relational because there's this part of like offering blessings, kind of like we did in our meditation, to all the beings of the world, like offering them peace and happiness. And so somehow back in like 1049 of the Common Era, somebody made up a meditation that includes all these cool things, man. Yeah, sign me up for that one. Somebody says you can study these from my Lama Pema Khandro Rinpoche. Chud is a big part of her lineage, and she's the one I'd recommend. Or if her class doesn't come around in time, another big Chudma is Sultrim Alione. Alione, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. Lama Sultrim, who's in Colorado, and her lineage also centered. She wrote a book called Feeding Your Demons, which would be a great supplemental reading to this class. Actually, it really goes with the subject matter of this class. Anyway, that's just an example that as you cultivate your practice, you might, I don't know, do witnessing meditation before you go to therapy, right? Sit there and watch the thoughts go by and not be them for a little while, create that space, and then go to your therapy appointment and totally be those thoughts and fricking purge them. And then, but you'll have flexed the muscle already when your therapist goes, now you do realize you aren't these thoughts, right? And you're like, yeah, I do. And, you could work these two aspects here, right? And then, you through that process, oh shoot, some trauma thing surfaced, and so you go do TRE and you make your body shake and vibrate, and you're getting this somatic thing, but all the while you're sending yourself love and compassion or something like that. So and you'd be cleaning up, so you can start to work in these various elements and create the spiritual or integrative or whatever you want to call the type of practice that you would be doing that really works for your life. And one of the best ways of doing that is working those four sort of compass points and getting them in balance. So with that said, get a little heat going in here. We are on to our next steps. So we're going to graduate from kind of the review of our previous modules in light of today's subject matter and into today's subject matter proper. So in learning to maintain an open-hearted orientation toward all the diverse experiences of life, we get into some really nifty alchemical stuff. So this is part of the spiritual work that is usually considered to be yogic. If we were to overlay the map that I'm working with here onto like a traditional Buddhist model, the earth element, for if any of you are into that or get into that later, the earth element would be what they call calm abiding. And it's all the fact that if you want the mind to learn to rest, practice resting. Right? Feeling good settles the mind. And if it's impossible to feel good, learn to foreground feeling neutral. Like it's learning to shift the attention, that innate muscle, toward calmness, neutrality, passivity. And then in traditional spheres, you get so good at that it lands you in what traditional Buddhism calls the four dhyanas, or the four meditative states, which are like great bliss, great joy. And people have experienced, people have written this down in subjective modern reporting. Yeah, that happens. If you meditate properly and well over a long duration, you fall into great peace, bliss, joy states. Cool. These are muscles you have. We learn to develop them. Calm abiding. Then in that traditional Buddhist framework, the next step, once you've got calm abiding, is from that place, you look at the world or you look at the mind and you learn to see the unreality of it in a healthy way, not the way I did when I was 15, but a different, what's supposed to happen then. I like to imagine that I was like a mediocre yogi, a mediocre tantric practitioner in my last life. So I incarnated in this one with all those seeds going off, but sort of at the wrong time without any support for them. Anyway, that's just the story I tell myself. But had you laid the proper foundation, you would be trained then to think about, to watch your thoughts pass by, for example, that witnessing meditation, and realize that they begin, they crest, they pass away, and then they say, like the tracks a bird leaves in the sky, there's nothing there once they've gone, right? It's like, but we tend to think of these thoughts as so real. Man, oh, I was so pissed at so-and-so, and like, it's all consuming. But from a meditator's mind, if you've trained this for a while, it's like, okay, I'm mad. I'm getting mad at so-and-so. I'm really mad at so-and-so. I'm gradually forgetting what the hell I was thinking about. And then you're on to the next subject. And we never notice that this happens. We think the thing is real. It's so weird. Similarly, then they'd do that with your thoughts, which are pretty easy. In the body, they would do that with things like pain or itches or the blissful sensations that were born out of your mastery of the first levels of meditation. They'd go, yeah, those rise and fall and crest and change too. None of that is like real, meaning solid. Then they'd take like, I caught myself like sort of compulsively looking up election results the last couple of days. I'm like, okay, which way are we headed, y'all? And the meditation there is the fact that you're not really in control, right? We kind of know this as adults. After a while, we figured out that like we don't get to be the boss of everything, but we still like, there's part of me that goes, oh, if I just refresh TikTok, someone's going to tell me that my team won, right? And the mind's like, control, I want it. And you learn to like witness that and recognize that that's not in accordance with reality, though. It's a thought. It appears. It's a cool hallucination. The hallucination exists as a hallucination, but it doesn't accord with reality. So these first two steps. There's a lot of depth one could do in this. We're modeling this according to human development. We're modeling according to the C's: calm, curiosity, and then there's traditional Buddhist meditation. So in the exoteric schools of Buddhism, or you would say probably like the mesoteric, right? The most outer would be, people make offerings to the temples, put incense at the altar. It's a religion, right? In the middle, though, they have just those first two levels, right? Develop calm abiding, develop special insight into the emptiness of reality, the fact that how we think it is fictional, man. It's a dream. Then in the inner work, the esoteric work, after that, you move into the yogic studies. And the yogic studies have like two divisions, to put it simply, and also not reveal secrets outside of an initiatic container. You could say that the first level is seeing appearances as divine. So back in water, we looked at how we perceive the world and all of our biases and stuff, and we go, oh yeah, those aren't real. Then in the fire element, you go, well, just like, an artist's painting isn't really the thing they've painted, but it could be beautiful. You've got all of this ability to like project light and make a world for yourself. How are you using that, my dude? Right. So this is the fire element. And so that's kind of the first step. And so what the yogis train is they train their mind that whatever happens, they say, oh, I'm going to see this as artist materials. Whatever happens. I won the lottery. Yay. That's artist material. Uninitiated people, they say, oh, they just react. Lottery came, therefore I'm happy. Yogis, they say, oh, how can I use this to create more beauty, right? Because then they know you win the lottery sometimes, other times you get your toe amputated or sorry, trigger warning, but fire element day. And for a yogi, they would say, oh, how am I going to use this as artist materials, right? And you hold this view that either one of those could be used to create more beauty or to express that open-heartedness because they don't have an existence of their own. That's the inside of that water element. Things don't have their own, the stuff exists, right? There was a state of California, whatever. We don't have to deny that existence necessarily. But what does it mean? There is no intrinsic meaning to it. How you foreground your attention, how you direct your attention determines what it's going to mean for you. And so the fire element becomes like a vow almost. For yogis, they literally take a vow about this, but like a commitment to viewing the world as potential meaning-making stuff and committing to make the most epic meaning you could out of it. So that's pretty fun. And then the second half of most tantric studies is where they're working with the internal energies in traditional schools. This is where like the inner heat yoga and a lot of the qigong and the inner alchemy stuff comes in there. And in this system, we map that onto the wind element, whose letter C is creative. This is where creative meditation comes in, using the mind to create imagery and play on our emotions ourselves. Instead of having the advertisers play on your emotions, you learn to play them yourself, like a musical instrument or something like that. So that's where we are. We're going to get into the emotional body and feeling the textures of our emotional energies as, you could say, artist material, or you could say spiritual fuel. In the traditional yogas, they say feeling those as divine forces, right? Like, oh, the sacred force of these emotional energies. So that's where we're at. Sound fun? Cool? Boring? Surprising? Startling? Somnambulizing? Okay, good. All right, let's go. So we're going to start this with a review of these practices from Peter Levine's work in somatic experiencing, which are resourcing, pendulating, and titrating. Resourcing, pendulating, and titrating. Okay, brief intro, and then we'll practice with it a bit. Let's start with pendulating, because resourcing, we've actually done that a bit this morning. The part where do y'all remember when we were doing the meditation, I was like, find a neutral spot in your body. Find some place that feels neutral. Do you recall that? Did that feel good to anyone? This is actually a trick if you're trying to recover from trauma or like meditation-induced dislocation. Finding neutral stuff is one of the best frickin' tools you can have, because if you try to, like, let's say you have a friend and they're like about to have a panic attack and you're like, I'm the only one here. I'm not a certified mental health professional, but I am the one holding your hand. If you try to tell them like, hey, let's focus on something good, like, it's impossible. Never say that to someone having a panic attack. Like, you're just being a jerk. It's kind of just gaslighting at that point. And a lot of spiritual traditions just sound like gaslighting too if you're in pain. They're like, hey, everything is innately open and good. Wise friend is all around you. And it's like, not when I have a headache. Are you kidding me? So one of the tricks that trauma therapists figured out is they'll say, okay, let your eyes scan around the wall and find some place neutral that they just want to rest. And one thing you might find is that not having to look for something that oh, that's beautiful, the trees outside, oh, that's beautiful, but just to go like, oh yeah, what's plain Jane, neutral, ordinary. The mind can go from this like, oh crap, I have a headache and I'm worried about the future, and it goes like, oh, a spot on the wall, that's fine. and being fine. In that case, it's not effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. It's like, oh, things can just be normal. It's grounding. It's grounding. So that's one style of resourcing. Another style of resourcing is actually savoring things that are pleasurable, right? So if you wanted a quick version that you could do, see if in your experience right now, there's anything enjoyable to you. Are you enjoying anything about your experience right now? I mean, I made myself just one bonus half-calf coffee this afternoon. It's also gloomy outside. I like that. And I like being with y'all doing things that feel meaningful to me. So like, these are all things. You might have yours, right? Maybe you're sitting and finally your butt doesn't hurt because you figured out the right cushion or something, whatever it is. Now just try to enjoy that like 2% more. Just by the power of directing your attention. Savor it. Like, how cool is that? Whatever that thing is. Okay, so these are some examples of resourcing, like you're filling up a well of an inner resource called pleasure and calm and ease, comfort. Okay, the whole first module is on that. That's all I'm going to say for now. Pendulating is what we want in this module. Pendulating. So this is a tool that helps you not get flooded by uncomfortable material. Pendulating is a tool, if you want one sentence to write down in your notes, pendulating is a tool that helps you to not get flooded by uncomfortable material. Why is this important? Well, in trauma therapy, as well as like in cognitive behavioral therapy, although they don't use this as much in a lot of the mainstream schools, what has to happen is we can't just stay in our earth element bubble where we've, made everything comfortable. No problems are going to come in my safe space. Like, safe spaces are great until you run into the rest of the world. Then you have to have like a portable safe space within, right? Similarly, if you want to heal from your traumas or like whatever's causing the phobias that you're trying to get over, you have to gradually expose yourself to those things, unfortunately. Either the feelings within, right? That's one of the things about meditation, which is like a big inspiration for this class, is like, if you have unresolved underlying trauma and you start meditating, sometimes feelings you did not even know were in there can begin to bubble up, and they can really ruin your day or your month or 6 months or 6 years, right? So we're going to need tools to be able to work with these things, because they won't lay dormant forever. Okay, so pendulating is a technique, and it goes with the titrating, by which, number one, you bring up a tiny bit of the uncomfortable material, and you feel it a little bit, and you recognize that, oh, I'm surviving. Okay, there it is. There is my fear. Let's say I have a fear of Western medical interventions. I ingrained this. I think I found where it came from. Like, I fell off my bike when I was 14 and I had to get stitches, and everyone around me freaked out. And I think that's when it started. I think I introjected their freak out. Not sure, working on it. But let's say I bring that up. I did this yesterday. That's why it's on my mind. I took my partner to her chiropractic appointment, and little did I know that in the lobby, there was someone who was doing like vitamin IV infusions. I hate IVs. IVs are not things that I like very much. So in my work, in my integrative practice for myself, what I did was I stayed in the room with them over there, and me mostly on my phone, slightly doing inner fire meditation, and occasionally glancing up at the med tech doing an IV infusion. And it was a great little thing. So I titrated, like that was the amount that I was ready to experience, right? Then if I wanted to do this, like I might do that again, or I might watch a video of somebody getting a shot or something like that. These are things that they do in like cognitive behavioral therapy, like gradual exposure. But the trick in trauma work, which is quite important, is to get there. And then what I did was I pendulated back to like spacing out on my phone. Oh, a little bit. Oh, there's medical procedure going on in the same room as me. Yikes. Well, what are my friends doing in Canada? Oh, there's a picture of it on Instagram. How cool. Well, oh, are they still there? Yep, there's that drip bag. Oh, interesting. What color is it? Oh, it's like that. Well, oh, breathe into your abdomen. And you can pendulate back and forth. And it creates a type of comfortable space around the disturbing stimulus. So why is this important in trauma recovery? Well, because in that case, what can happen is if you don't have that comfortable space, when the memories, visions, or you don't even know their memories and visions, you just have a feeling come up, they'll flood you, and you actually clench and resist against that trauma again, and it doesn't heal it, it locks it in further, right? Or meditation could bring up repressed material that you didn't know was there, and then you don't have any way to integrate it like pendulating and titrating would be. And so now it comes up, you resist against it, it floods you, and now instead of being a comfortably repressed person, now you're a person with panic attacks ever since you started meditating. Like, that's a bummer, dude. So we definitely need pendulating and titrating to help us integrate this stuff. This is something, again, you're not necessarily the mental health professional on the scene, but if you have a friend, let's say, who is coming out of a retreat, like you're the one who picks them up and it was a disaster for them, one way you can help them is to encourage them not to work on the problematic material that came up. Oh, I'm so freaked out. Maybe it's this and maybe it's that. No, don't do that. Let's go have an ice cream. And you wait until that shit settles down, because until then you can't dip your toes in the way that would heal it, right? It's all or nothing phenomenon. So you want to help them settle it back down and then dip in the toes, right? Then dip in the toes. Let me, as not your therapist, let me help you settle down by holding your hand. And then we're going to set you up with this great therapist who's going to help you work with what came up. What's SUDS? What are you putting in the chat box, SUDS?
Systematic Utilization Desensitization System.
Systematic Utilization Desensitization Systems. Try saying that one time fast.
That's the term we learned to describe what you're talking about.
Yeah.
In therapy.
Yeah. So in this case, the pendulating to resource is part of the desensitization aspect. Just like in EMDR, the eye movement is part of the desensitization aspect, the D in EMDR, right? And why does that work? Because it's well documented, even though it's like 10 years ago, it seemed like just hippie stuff. You're like, well, wiggle your eyes back and forth, right? Wiggle your eyes back and forth. Okay. And one of the ways that works is that while you're bringing up the uncomfortable stuff, you get to create distance from it. Instead of having it flood you, you get to create distance from it by doing a thing in your body. And actually, the eye movement helps keep the brain from going into the pattern of eyes locked front in a fight or flight response. They're now in an orienting pattern. So it's quite helpful. Okay, so resourcing, pendulating, and titrating. What's titrating, in case you haven't heard it before? It's a word from chemistry, and before that in alchemy. Whereas if you have two agents that if you put them together, they'll explode. If you put them together drop by drop, they'll eventually blend without a cataclysmic reaction. So that's the titration. And in our case, it means going little by little, little by little. So let's practice resourcing for a few moments as our way back in. Find any posture you like, really. as long as it's comfortable. We're not going to be in the resourcing for very long, but just find yourself a comfortable posture. And we'll do resourcing with a nature image. I like this one. We already talked about a bunch of others. So if this isn't the one for you, there's other options, but resourcing with a nature image. So imagine your inner body, kind of like as in the Tibetan systems, they say like a clear blue sky, just empty and open. And then think of a place that you have been in nature, ideally, or maybe even some place that you've just seen or heard about or imagined being in. And try to get the full-on experience of, maybe it's comfort or openness or bliss that being in that place generates in you. And then please imagine, if you will, that the interior landscape of your body is that place in nature. What would it feel like to have that place be what you are inside? Notice what, if anything, changes when you do that. And if any of the sensations you experience are enjoyable or grounding or even pleasantly neutral, feel free to savor them a little bit. Good. Then allowing any of that feels beneficial to remain with you. We'll just shift gears with the mind and begin to come back toward the interpersonal. You can deepen your breath a little bit. And we'll finish that brief practice of resourcing with a nature image. So that was what, all of 2 minutes, something like that. So this is another way to break myths about meditation, that they have to sit for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. No, 2 minutes, like you might have just, I know for me in that one, I might have just experienced more neurological shift than sitting for 20 minutes, sort of trying to wrestle my thoughts into submission or something. So they can be very brief. What we're looking for is what's the effect. So any quick thoughts on resourcing with a nature image? How was that for you? Okay. Did you get it? Did it work? Okay. And if it's not your favorite, well, we've got other methods. Uplifting. Yes. Mine was, I haven't been there very often, but I got this image of Big Sur in my mind, and there was like a waterfall and the sun was goldenizing and like, oh, it was super cool. And then that landscape was in my body. So like the cliffs were like my legs and my spine, and then the water was my dantian, and then the sunlight was, oh, it was neato. So that was fun. Sometimes online resourcing a nature image makes me want to turn off my computer and get outside. Yeah, absolutely. So, but I miss you though, is just one thing to share authentically. So sometimes actual nature could be the most enjoyable. Yeah. Okay, so this is resourcing with a nature image. You could use whatever kind of resourcing helped you, right? We did a whole module on that, so I'm going to try to keep myself from going into it again, even though I'm super stoked about this most primitive of technology. So then pendulating, the question in the chat box, how are titrating and pendulating different? Here it is. Titrating is the fact that you're using only a little bit at a time of the challenging stimulus. Pendulating is the fact that you're moving like a pendulum, swinging from the challenging stimulus back to the resource, from the resource back to the challenging stimulus. And slowly by slowly, you're mixing these together, but not in a way where it's like, okay, like we said before, wow, now my resource has all of this trauma in it, rats. No, it works better than that. The resource tends to infect the challenging material. And ultimately, that's what allows this sense that we can integrate it into our being. Does that answer that question? Does that help make sense? Perhaps the person who asked that question can say yes or no, just so I know that we're good, so that we're on. Okay, so let's do a simple, easy, lighthearted practice of pendulating and titrating before we go on. What I'd like to do is not, let me try to put the language so I don't do an accidental hypnosis, anti-hypnosis here. I'd like you to choose a mild something that you're like not looking forward to, or an emotional experience that's kind of hard for you, but not really all that hard. Okay, like, so for me, like having to make a phone call to someone where I'm not exactly sure the subject matter or the purpose of our call, like a friendly relational phone call. I don't like it so much. It's not my favorite. So like that level, I'm not going to do visualizing IV infusions in this one. That would be beyond what I want us to do in this class, right? Because it's a little too, we're not going to spend enough time for that, right? So don't bring up hyper stimulating stuff. Just like, can you think of like, hey, gotta make a resume, ugh, or something like that. And maybe even, would you put in the chat box if you have something like that so we can have some examples? What do you say, Jim? Have you got one?
I have a client on Mondays I don't particularly enjoy seeing.
There you go. That's exactly right. That's
Very difficult person.
Yeah. So that type of thing. What else? Anybody else? Do you have to go to the DMV or something like this? Leg day? Is it going to be leg day coming Tuesday? What do you say? Let's see. Get quotes on my downed fence. Perfect. That's exactly right. Yeah, I have to go probably get my partner some new windshield wiper blades, which means like going into the auto parts store and being like, it's a Subaru. What year is that? Okay. So little pains in the butt. Little pains in the butt. Sweeping my house. Exactly. This type of stuff. So we're going to use this to practice the concept. And then once you've had that, you can play it with bigger stuff if necessary. So get in your spot. This one's also quick because these are just kind of like little tasters. And we'll do a deeper sit in a couple minutes. So let's maybe try a couple sighs or 2-1 breaths just to do some regulation. At least for me, I'm talking a lot and that can actually dysregulate the breath energy a bit. So okay. Then let's do resourcing with a nature image or any version of resourcing that might work for you. Like if that hand on heart mudra was the best, you could try that. But something that's likely to bring up that sense of comfort and ease, maybe even containment. So if you're doing nature image, you just visualize the inner body as like a clear open sky. And then calling to mind someplace in nature that gives you a sense of ease or wonder, openness or comfort, or even bliss. And imagine, like, what would that feel like if that was my inner landscape? And then note whatever sense of, it could be just groundedness, or it could be like a real open-hearted love, or anywhere in between or tangential to those type of feelings, but whatever feels enjoyable about that. Just savor that a bit. See if you can breathe into the enjoyability, enjoyableness. Let it expand and grow. This type of meditation is very healing to the body and mind. Then we want to imagine, kind of like at a distance, imagine the thing that you resist or is uncomfortable. And if you can, play this mental experiment of, can I feel about 5% of the discomfort of that? Whether it's like the resistance and procrastination or fear or anger or whatever it is that makes that uncomfortable. Like, what would 5% of that feel like to you? Good. And then not too long hanging out there, I want you to almost, like, for me inside, I'm seeing it visually as I'm swinging back now to my inner landscape and go back to your nature retreat. And whatever the wonderful qualities of that were, re-invoke those full force as a flavor of inner resource. Then again, you can see off in the distance, oh, there's that thing I don't like so much. And you could, again, do the same as we did before, or if you want, you could swing and go like, now what would maybe 12% of the discomfort feel like? Could I dipped my toes in? Could I dip my foot in? And and just experience that 12%, or you could stay with 5 or less. It's up to you. It's your inner experience. Intuit what's right for you. And then don't stay too long, but what if you swung back and fell into the pool of resource? That place in nature as your inner body, or whatever resourcing tool you happened to be using. And then for now, we're just going to leave it there. You can let whatever visualization of the challenging thing just kind of disperse or float back into its own realm. And feel that you get to maintain whatever pleasurable aspects, integrating aspects of the resource you enjoy. And let's just do one more little breath regulation on the way out. Could be a sigh, could be a 2-1 breathing, or even just mindfulness of the breath. Good. Then deepen your inhales a little bit, which tends to stimulate the mind. Maybe sigh if you want. When you're ready, lift your gaze and come back to the interpersonal. Come back to the interpersonal. All right. What do you think? Let's hear your thoughts briefly on that practice. That was pendulating from resource to titrating into an uncomfortable thought or stimulus. What do you think? How was that for you? Jim, what do you say?
The first thing that popped in my head is, why would I want to go from my happy place to there?
Yeah, good question.
Why?
And I say, welcome to the rebellious teenager. Yes, this is your class, my friend. Welcome here.
I don't want to go.
Yeah, yeah. And for like skillful practice, that feeling of I don't want to could be what you pendulate to, right? It's like, oh, feel 5% of that and just like, let it happen. So yeah, cool. What else do people experience? Success, failure, favorite thing ever, worst thing ever, any neutral? What do you say? Give me a little feedback, por favor. It'll help me teach the rest of the class. Okay, how about Amanda, then Mike?
I felt like it was really easy for me to have an emotional release that was controlled, kind of like letting a little bit of air out of a balloon, like with the
Nice.
sadness.
Yeah.
And that felt just really regulative. Like if I like could only let out a little bit of emotion at that moment, like if I was really triggered, then maybe that could be like I could have that visualization like moment to moment and just go, okay, let me imagine this at 10% of the effect it's having on me. And then it's not like I'm totally like, reacting to it, but I'm also not spiritual bypassing. So I felt that was really useful.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of saying exactly what I would want you to get out of this exercise. I love that balloon kind of metaphor, right? Because there could be kind of also like, well, if you let it go too fast, you might lose your balloon, right? It's like, but you can't keep you can't keep the thing full either. So what do we? Oh, just. And in that way, exactly, we're not repressing. We're not going like, oh, this emotion can't come out. We're going like, what's the best, safest, most compassionate way to let this emotion express itself, come up into awareness, have its space? That's what this kind of technique is doing. So I really enjoyed that metaphor. Yeah. Mike, what do you say?
Let's see. The pendulating worked great. The titration, I was having a little bit of a challenge controlling how much I was experiencing of that.
Yeah, and that can happen with emotions that are stronger than we expect them to be. That can happen, or sometimes most of us have been trained to kind of have an all or nothing consciousness, like that's what our consciousness does. And so we can say, oh, experience 10%, and the mind's like, did you say 100%? Okay, here we go. And it's especially tricky, like if you share this with a friend or something like that, realize, like our negativity bias really plays a part. So some of us might be able to, like if you gave them some really good chocolate and you're like, now I only want you to enjoy that, like 50% of how much you'd normally, like we'd be able to do that. But if you brought up a challenging experience, we can only experience it 100% because our brains are sort of biased that way to fall right into as much pain as possible. So it's really tricky. There are a lot of different elements that can be involved in that. Yeah. So maybe practice, or it may be a different technique that's right, for you if you want to do this type of work.
I think for me this is a wonderful practice, and it's not one that I'm unaccustomed to.
Yeah, cool, good stuff. Today I was also using borrowed from neurolinguistic programming, which I don't necessarily agree with everything that they say, but in this case I use the image of like, oh, what if the uncomfortable thing was far away? As a way, some of us, when we do it visually, it helps us do the emotions that way, and you can kind of like go to it and get a little bit of it and then come back. So some schools use this of like visualizing it and making it small, it can be very useful. Okay, what else do we have in here? Yeah, fell into a lot of resistance. Yeah, and so again, it may be that this is not the right technique for you or for that particular thing or anything like that. Or sometimes it's also that we don't yet know how to titrate. Like once we bring up the thing, it's on. And so the trick of being like, "Hey, actually, we can just experience 2%. So it's something to play with. Okay. Breath was more shallow when I thought of the thing. Yeah. And these are the things in that work with the subtle energies of our living emotions. You'll see some of the yogas, classical yogas, are meant to work with your breath to like, my Lama talks about it as intentionally making yourself incongruent, right? So if you're congruent around upset, your thoughts are thinking upset thoughts, your body is adopting an upset posture, your breath adopt an upset breath, and your upset becomes very stable. But if your thoughts are thinking upset thoughts, your body's clenched up and you go, the upset becomes a little more wobbly. It's a stool with only 2 legs to stand on. And then what if, you do the upset and you go like this? Now it's like your body and your breath are totally at peace, and it's just your mind that's having a negativity attack. And the mind becomes kind of unstable to stay in the upset. So intentional incongruence is one of these yogic methods. I had the experience, I like this today, where the feelings of resistance and discomfort didn't go away, but for me, it was almost like I could see the divine comedy in it, like while still honoring, like, okay, look, you don't want to go to the auto parts store. And then both resistant me and resource me were both going like, yeah, isn't that funny? And so these are the type of things you might find happen as you're able to pendulate from resource into challenge. So yeah, the dosage. Okay, well, that's a good sign to me to look up a little more of how to skillfully teach titration, because there might be some methods that good instructors use that I just don't have the right cues for yet. So that's a nice feedback for me to get, so I can keep working with that. But do we feel good with this concept? Titration, whatchamacallit, resourcing, pendulating, titration. Cool. And these are tools for you if you like them. I recommend personally Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger book. Not everybody likes Peter Levine these days. I've seen him on YouTube. I think he's cool when I see him, but who knows what's what. Anyway, regardless of all that, I think the book is great. And he talks about cool stuff. He talks about like the trauma spirals, like when people are going through a release, they'll spiral all the way into a flooded state. And then if you're a good therapist, when it looks like they're dissociating, you don't say, hey, stay with the emotion. No, you let them, because that's the unwinding of the trauma, and it's a natural pendulation. And then when they're dissociated, eventually they'll flow back. And so this technique of pendulation is actually, it's taking something we do naturally and learning to do it intentionally so that we can have parameters that are more consistently healing than kind of the more haphazard version that often happens naturally outside of our ancient primate environment. So that's something for you. Let me check the notes here and see what to do before the break. And there we go. Okay, good. So one thing to introduce before the break, and then we will get after it, is last part of our class is we're going to be working with emotional alchemy and a little bit of shadow work, and those two will really support one another. Okay, I already gave you the argument for shadow work. As we go through these developmental stages, especially in this teenagery one we're talking about today, there can be aspects of ourselves that we disown because we're not tolerant of ambiguity. We say, oh, if you're going to be this, you can't be this. I once upon a time thought, oh, if you're going to be spiritual, you can't have any feelings. And that was a mean piece of shadow work when it came up for me to have to do, man. What a bummer. So we want tools to be able to do that consciously when it comes up on its own. And then also they say, if you want to save yourself a little pain, do the shadow work before it surprises you. Actively go and clean up the things that might jump out from the shadows, as it were. So we're going to do some of that shadow work too later on. Yeah, describe the pain on a scale of 1 to 10, and we're working with where the attention, where we're focusing our attention, talking about titrating from the chat box here. So the subject matter to introduce, and then we'll meditate with this when we come back, is about universal human needs and our universal human emotions. This talk will be about 15 minutes, and then it'll be the official break time. So if you need to set your internal clock. So part of the inspiration for this course, as I mentioned, comes from work with like coaching people in their spiritual partnerships, coaching people in businesses who need to be able to communicate with each other. That's where many of my testimonials come from, is that people who are like in their corporate environment learned conscious communication, and like the drama in their office dropped by 50% just by like learning it and subconsciously teaching everyone else by example. Like really cool. And one of the big challenges that relates to this level of development is when we should be learning to tolerate ambiguity, but sometimes don't, we get the thing that comes up where some emotions are allowed and some emotions are not allowed. Did anyone else get this type of training as a young person or an adolescent person, right? And not doing gender essentialism, but culturally, if you got the training for boys, at least from my era and many of those before it, anger is allowed, but sadness is not, right? Here's the root of the old toxic patriarchy thing, right? And it's like the worst alchemy ever. You can repress your anger or you can repress your sadness and transmute that all into aggression. And then they tell boys that's a good idea. Like, oh my gosh, bummer. This is a bummer, man. Makes me want to start teaching martial arts again or something, like anything to just start to let that balloon out. Okay, and then if you got the training for little girls in this society, then it's the opposite, right? Sadness is allowed, as long as it's not too loud. As long as it's quiet sadness, that's allowed, but you can't get angry and talk back to anybody, right? These are some broad strokes. And then, of course, there wasn't any training for non-binary kids. So, that's not even on the list. You're either which toxic version do you get? Like, this is a bummer, right? So some emotions are good little boys, blah, 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 don't cry, right? Some emotions are bad, good little girls, don't talk back. And the whole thing's a bunch of bullshit. So you may have gotten any treatment, and we still do this. I'm going to rein in my rant, but you get a little bit of my rant, because I love the system of nonviolent communication. And if you start learning that a little bit, I don't always love the way people practice it, by the way, just to be clear, but I love the system. If you start learning that a little bit, you start to realize how violent our communication is. Things as innocuous as when your friend tells you what they're worried about and you tell them, don't worry. Dang it, Bobby McFerrin. I didn't know it was toxic patriarchy when you said, don't worry, be happy. Because what's happening, a living emotion is arising. It's arising to answer and rebalance the energy in your body in accordance with these sacred needs of our indwelling spirit and sacred body. It's coming up and it's going, I'm worried. And then your well-intentioned, altruistic, otherwise really just mensch of a friend goes, oh, that feeling you're having? Don't do that. It's making me uncomfortable. Like, that's all the subtext. We don't realize it. They're just like, don't, it seems like they want to help us and they think they do, but really what's going on is like, oh, it makes me uncomfortable when you're worrying. I would like you to change your emotional experience right now. And one, that's not really possible. And two, it's not a good idea. Like, dude, so, thanks, rant complete. The conditioning that some emotions are allowed, some are not allowed, that's usually happens in the formation of a self phase of human development. And then when we go into the tolerating ambiguity or like the who am I of adolescence, we can turn that into some emotions are good, some emotions are bad. If you want some extra reading on this, you can read a great book called When Panic Attacks. I think the author's name is David Byrne. He's a developer of a certain type of cognitive behavioral therapy. And in that, they've found one of the big causes of panic attacks is they call the replaced emotion theory, right? So an emotion comes up and deep below the radar, our mind goes, can't feel that way. And so it suppresses that emotion entirely and just replaces it with a sense of overwhelming something's wrong. And you can get lifelong anxiety, panic attacks, or depression from this. It's a bummer. Read the book if you want to know more about that. So in our meditation system, that's why this system has a fire element, because a lot of the meditation systems in the ashrams of the world, they'll go up to the water element. You'll calm down, realize nothing is real. Now stay there, right? And if you were an emotional repressor, the problem is you are now doing more of the same under spiritual language, right? Or you're gaslighting yourself. Oh, try to be joyful, try to be loving, wise friend, guru is everywhere. And the best thing to do would actually be to uncover what the real living emotions are that are going on below the surface. What do you think? Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm quite enthusiastic about this, but I can't tell from your postage stamps if this is as meaningful to you as it is to me or anything like that. So, and we can tell, am I making the connection clear to others than myself of how this relates to like the developmental phase we're talking about, right? It's the tolerance of all these, who is it? Daigen Katagiri Roshi, I think it's this poem, Sun Buddha, Moon Buddha, Happy Buddha, Sad Buddha. It's this sense that like the wakefulness that they call Buddha in that tradition can tolerate happiness, can tolerate sadness, can tolerate worry. All these living sensations are not a problem. They're just flavors of human experience, but we've learned to problematize them and we become then fragmented beings. So here's another catchphrase. If you didn't resonate with developing open-heartedness with all the diverse appearances of life, if you didn't resonate with, what was the other one? Tolerance of ambiguity, right? Then you could think of becoming whole beings rather than fragmented beings, right? Because the problem that happens that when we introject these, some parts of us are good, some parts of us are bad, we fracture ourselves psychologically. And body workers like me and somatic therapists realize this shows up in the body. We actually fracture ourselves physically if we do that for long enough. And that psychological fracturing can have really nasty effects on our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others, our relationship with planet Earth. Man, if people could learn to do this work, we wouldn't have to solve climate change. Like people would just be out in nature going like, holy crap, this is great, man. Let's get our stuff together. And if they weren't ready for that, they would pendulate to it eventually from all that time spent in natural landscapes. So this is on human emotions. Then last piece of theory before our break, Similarly with human needs, universal human needs. So in this system, especially in the communication side, I break these down into 5 for ease, because there are countless emotions that we could make poetry for, but I say happy, scared, angry, sad, and worried. These are your the big 5, the 5 seasons. Summer, happy. Winter, scared. Spring, angry. Autumn, sad. What season is it? Daylight savings time, worried. Right. Then human needs, I also tend to break into 5. You could also follow like Manfred Max Neef's 9, which is where Dr. Marshall Rosenberg got his list for nonviolent communication. He expanded on that list of 9, but I do 5, and I go survival needs, not that they're bad, they're going downward. Survival needs and transcendence needs. Survival and transcendence. And then what was the other one? Oh yeah, connection and autonomy. Survival, transcendence, connection, autonomy. And then the last one I say is peace, right in the middle, the need for peace. So because of this, you get a nice little framework. Come on, thought train. Don't be fragmented, be whole. We've got to teach until the break. Then you get a break. Okay, so similarly to the emotions, last piece of theory is we sometimes are also taught that certain needs are just fine and certain needs are to be shunned. So for example, right, if you got some of the cultural training, if you weren't raised by well-meaning hippies, you probably got some of the cultural training that sexual desire, that's a lower level human need. Even if you were raised by well-meaning hippies, like in an ashram or something, they might have given you this sense, oh, sexual desire, no. But self-transcendence, yes. Self-transcendence is a beautiful human need. Or let's say you were raised by well-meaning Marxists who don't believe in self-transcendence, except for maybe to the community or something like that. But like spiritual stuff, no, that's poison. That's the opiate of the masses. And so, yes, you want to survive. That's why we have unions. You want a good family and a mate. Those are all fine. But the part of you that feels there might be something more in life, nope, can't do that one. Can't do that one. Meditation, off limits, bro. We're bringing culture forward into the modern age, right? They tried that in a couple countries. It didn't work out because it was fracturing. It was denying an aspect of human experience. Okay, autonomy needs. Some of us who were raised to be, well, I'll just say mine. I inherited a bit of like an avoidant attachment style. So I think autonomy needs are great. They're like, you should always focus on being autonomous and like making sure autonomy is covered. Communion needs, whatever, take them or leave them. They're not that important. Others, though, like maybe they got the what's it called, anxious attachment style. Communion needs are everything. And if your boyfriend needs some autonomy, they're full of crap, man. Who needs that? No, you don't need space. Are you kidding me? You need to learn how to connect. Right. So the trick, though, is that none of these are the right answer, or no horoscope of these. Like, oh, yes, I've got a sun sign in communion with my rising is in autonomy and my moon is in self-transcendence. Like that's not the right needs horoscope, because there's another person who's got inner peace and survival, and they don't even have a moon sign, and they're just fine also. What we want to get is we want to learn how to crack the heart open so that it can love our whole selves, which are going to be unique. Like I probably in this life, my sun sign in autonomy is likely not going to shift to communion or something like that. I can love myself from there. And I can also learn to know that there are communion needs that I tend to deny, and to re-embrace those so I can be a bit more of a whole person. So this work is really potent and powerful. And it's important to take on the meditation path. So that's why I'm including so much chatting and discourse today. I hope that feels enjoyable to you. The last class we did more like sit, talk a little, sit. This class is a little more like, what's resourcing? Oh, what are human needs? But it's attempting in me to kind of answer a deficiency in a lot of the instruction in meditation and spirituality that we have, and also to take some of the like cutting edge understandings in human development and inform ourselves with them, or to make them part of a path. Like instead of having one of my mentors who's like a PhD and she's going to all these conferences and stuff, but then does anybody ever do that every day? Or are they just talking about it at integral conferences, right? So how would we do that? How would we re-embrace human needs in a daily practice, right? That's kind of what I want to get to if you're into it. Okay, comments, questions? We did emotions and needs, becoming whole from being fragmented. I gave a disclaimer for why today's class is the way it is. Any thoughts on that before we take a little 15-minute break? Yeah, we got a great mention in the chat box of Brene Brown's latest book, Atlas of the Heart. I also like this book. I don't like it all that much. For some, like the way it's written, it just hit me in the wrong time in my life or something like that. I like her other work a little. I really like her book, Braving the Wilderness, is like really epic. But there are a couple ideas in Atlas of the Heart that are really cool. And they're all about the various flavors of our human emotional experience. And so it's a great read if you need to reintegrate some of those aspects of oneself. It's a nice kind of exposure to that. Okay, well, let's take a break then. So it's 3:45 by my clock. Let's come back at 4 Pacific, which is the top of the hour, wherever you are. And we'll do our last section for the day. So thank you so much. See you then.